Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of November. Today we have some interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with north, with Kupiansk Liman frontline. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates from this area. First, let's discuss the report of Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. Today the Russians reported that using the missiles they attacked a small village, Velikie Hutory. This village located in Kharkiv area. This is the very far back of the Ukrainian army, of the Ukrainian reserves, or Ukrainian attack fist that located on the Kupiansk front line. And the Ukrainians were using these reserves with one purpose: to attack in direction of Kuzyomovka and Novoselovska, these towns. If you remember, this is the area where is the railroad that the Ukrainians during the previous weeks were trying to cross this railroad and were trying to encircle Kuzyomovka from the north and to take control of this town, because Kuzyomovka is the key region. And if the Ukrainians are able to take Kuzyomovka, or if we're talking about they were able to take Kuzyomovka, I believe that there would be no towns in front of Svatova, and in that case we would talk about the Svatova defense operation. But the Russians attacked this village, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost around 200 Polish volunteers in this area, 200 soldiers. And the Russians said that mainly this group consists of Polish volunteers. Today, as you can see, there are a lot of updates on the area near Novoselovska. This town, Kuzyomovka, Novoselovska, in this area. Let's take a look at this map. According to the Western sources map, there are no updates, of course, but the Russians reported that during the day there were very heavy clashes in this area, and they reported that this morning they managed to enter Novoselovska, and some sources are saying that by the evening the Russians managed to establish control over this small village, over this small checkpoint that Ukrainians were using during the previous weeks with one purpose: trying to develop their offensive operation in direction of Svatova. But today we can say, at least some sources are saying, that the Ukrainians lost this bridgehead, and we can say that the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult. They have more forces in this area, they have some kind of initiative in this area, but they lost the main town they were fighting for, and they were forced to stop back. Now the Russians have, let's say, reached the Zherebets river. As you can see, as soon as they got control over this Novoselovska, they managed to establish control over this bank of the river Zherebets. So that's why the bank of this river was under Ukrainian control, at least most of the time. But now there are some places where the Russians managed to cut this bridgehead into several parts. As a result of that attack during the Novoselovska, this town, the Ukraine lost around 30 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. I believe that these things like attack against over this small village to about on Ukrainians' reserves, and it was the picture, it was the things of one picture. So the Ukrainians lost their possibilities, their reserves, and they couldn't stay there long, and they were forced to step back. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russians did another attack in direction of Stelmakhovka, or to be more precise, the Russians spotted some Ukrainian groups that were collected in this area. I believe that Ukrainians were planning to send some reserves or reinforcement in direction of Novoselysk just to pin down the Russians or to stop their development or so on. But the Russians attacked these groups before, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians on this area lost around 70 soldiers and something around 7 armored vehicles. I'm not sure that the Russians will try to develop their offensive operation. Furthermore, I believe that maybe the Russians will clear Novoselsk, this small town. Maybe they will force the Ukrainians to step back near Stelmakhovka. But at the end of all this situation, I believe that the Russians will decide to step back, because to prepare some kind of defense line on this area right in front of Berestova, I believe that the Russians don't have such time, they don't have such resources, and I believe that the line along the railroad proves that it's the best place to defend the Russian, to defend their border, to defend their land. So I believe that the Russians, maybe they will push the Ukrainians back, and after that they will step back in direction of Kuzyomovka, and then we will allow the Ukrainians to come back. Because the previous days show us that it's a very nice place to reduce the Ukrainian army. They're attacking this area in front without counting their soldiers, their losses, and it's a very nice trap that the Russians can use in the future, because till now the Ukrainians couldn't penetrate these defense orders in this line. Now we are moving to the south, and now we are going to Kremenная. As you can see, the Ukrainians made another attempt in attack with direction Chervonopopovka, but their attacks were repulsed. The Russians didn't provide any numbers about any losses from the Ukrainian side in this area. Very interesting updates are coming from the south, from the area between Slaviansk and the Seversk. The Russians reported that somewhere in this area, the Russians attacked the base of Ukrainian forces, and as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to destroy up to 100 soldiers and 11 armored vehicles from Foreign Legion. So as you can see, the Ukrainian losses on the north part are very big, and I don't remember when the Russians were so successful in such rocket attacks, because I don't remember such a, let's say, good day for the Russians for their artillery and rocket systems. I don't remember. Maybe 2 months ago, maybe the last such day we saw. Maybe before the Kherson or Kharkiv counteroffensive operation, so maybe 2 months ago. Now we are moving to Seversk and Bakhmut frontline. Today there were a lot of updates, very interesting updates on this area, and the most important one that the Ukrainians made another attempt of counteroffensive operation. The Ukrainians attacked the Russians. They were trying to attack the Russians somewhere near Bakhmutska, maybe in this direction. Maybe the Ukrainians were attacking in this direction, somewhere here, or maybe the Ukrainians were attacking in the direction of this cross in this area. As a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost around 60 soldiers and something around 5 armored vehicles. If we are talking about the Russians, during the previous days, during the previous hours, during this day, they reported that the Russians managed to establish control over this gas station. So they get very close to another village around Bakhmut is Podgorodnya, and as you can see now, the Russians control this gas station, this cross, and I believe that this is the reason. And of course we understand that if the Russians control this cross, that means that they managed to cut supply and support of Bakhmutsk and Solidar from Bakhmut using this road, and maybe that was the real direction of Ukrainians attack in direction of this gas station, but that attack was repulsed and Ukraine lost, as I told you, 60 soldiers and something around 5 armored vehicles. If we are talking about the south of Ukraine, about the south of Bakhmut, this area, the Russians push, and soon we are going to see first updates, and so we're going to see how the Russian takes control over these 4 famous towns like Azaryanovka, Kurdyumovka, Andreevka, the small village, Andreevka, and Klishevka. The Russians pushes, and if we're talking about the Russians, they're saying that 2 Ukrainian brigades in this area, I believe that they have lost combat capabilities. If we take a look at deployment map, the Russians are saying that 58th motorized brigade, mainly that took that fight with the Russians in Solidar, near this gas station and so on. They had very big losses during the previous weeks, and some Russian sources are saying, according to the radio talks, that the Russians managed to get from the Ukrainian side, this brigade is already to leave their position and to leave Bakhmut at all. If we're talking about the south, we discussed that 53rd Mechanized Brigade is up to be collapsed as well, and the situation in this area very critical. The Ukrainians send more and more reinforcement just with one purpose: to stop the Russians and to slow them down and to win some time, maybe some minutes before this entire area will be collapsed by the Russians. If we're talking about Donetsk area, and if we're talking about Donetsk, There are not much changes. The Russians continue fighting near Pesky, near Opытne, trying to complete the clearing operation of Vodyane. There are very heavy tank duels between Pervomaiska and Pesky. The Russians are getting closer to Nivolska, but they're not storming this small town. They still try to take control over the trenches and over the fortification that locate on the east side and the south side of this town. If we're talking about the Marinka, there are very heavy clashes inside the town. The Russians are moving very slowly, and we can understand what's going on there. If we are talking about South Donetsk region, the Ukrainians made counteroffensive operation from Novomikhailivka just on purpose to pin down, maybe to try to find some weak position in Russian defense orders. The same thing, the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russians in direction of Novodonetsk from Zolotaya Niva and Prichistovka, and the same attack, same attempt was around Vremivka tactical bridgehead in direction of Novodarivka. And this is the third attack in a row, or maybe fourth. During the previous 2 weeks, the Ukrainians increased their activity in this area. Also, there was update that the Russians managed to destroy some commandos group in this area, and up to 40 soldiers were killed, the Ukrainian soldiers. If we are talking about the results of South Donetsk battle, the Ukraine lost up to 60 soldiers and something around, my bad, something around 50 soldiers and 4 armored vehicles in the South Donetsk region. If we are talking about Zaporizhzhia, the situation is calm, no progress, nothing there. The Ukrainians continue, and some Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians continue redeployment process from this area. But some Russian expert mentioned that the Ukrainians are not redeployed their 17th Tank Brigade. And a lot of Russian military experts ask the question why the Ukrainians are not redeploying this 17th Tank Brigade. We understand that it's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians will try to cross the river using the tanks. So I believe that, of course, they're not going to do this. But most of the military experts were saying that, or at least they were expected that this brigade would be redeployed in direction of Zaporizhzhia to increase the force and power of the Ukrainian army in this area. And of course, as we discussed, if the Ukrainians plans to attack in the south of Ukraine without these tanks, without this brigade, it's highly unlikely that they will achieve some success or achieve anything at all. And this is like another evidence of the fact that Ukrainians have some plans for this brigade, and maybe they're planning to do with this brigade something more. And as we discussed yesterday, I believe that Ukrainians will try to keep this brigade in Kherson with one purpose. As soon as they see, that these days, these hours, the Russians are doing their own redeployment process. As we discussed yesterday, the Institute of Study of War projected that by the end of December, the Russians will redeploy up to 500,000 army. And of course, it is very necessary, important to understand whether the Russians are planning to deploy this army. I told you that my projection is that the Russians will try to attack the north, but anything might happen. Maybe the Russians will deploy this army in the south and will try to take Zaporizhzhia, or to push from the south, and the same situation from some region. They will try to push from the north, trying to make like wide encirclement of Donbass and to complete the Donbass occupation. Who knows? And this is the reason why the Ukrainians keep their 17th Tank, one of the most powerful brigade in the south, trying to understand, analyze where the Russians are planning to deploy their forces, and then they will deploy their forces right in front of main Russian forces somewhere in the front lines. It's one of the opinions to understand what's going on in Ukraine. If we're talking about the entire energy facilities, today we got a report that almost entire Ukraine was restored. The electricity was restored all over the entire Ukraine. And as we can see, everybody saw it. The Russians calculated that the collapse of energy system took around up to 3-4 days, and I believe that the more Russians attack the Ukrainian energy facility, this duration will increase, and as soon as the Russians will be are able to increase the duration of this collapse till week or two, I believe at that very moment they will start doing their job, and they will start the beginning of I don't know, of the end of this operation. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.